Why did they all fall silent when she entered the room? Maybe it was the way she carried herself, steady, distant, untouchable, or maybe because somewhere deep down, they knew she'd been through something they couldn't understand. Lieutenant Sarah Reeves adjusted the strap of her rifle as the blistering Iraqi sun climbed higher over the cracked rooftops of Fallujah. She'd been in position for 72 hours straight, no shade, no reprieve, no comfort beyond the cool steel pressed against her shoulder. The air shimmered above the ruins in front of her. Heat waves distorted the world into something ghostly, unreal. But her focus never wavered. 3 days, 3 sunrises, 3 sunsets. Waiting for the moment, that single flicker of movement that would justify her patience. Her radio crackled softly, the static a whisper in her ear. "Phantom, this is base. Target building is still quiet. Maintain position." "Copy that," she whispered. Her lips barely moved. Even her breathing was measured. Every ounce of her was control. The only sound around her was the wind dragging over sand and stone. Once, a lizard scuttled across her ghillie suit and she didn't flinch. A sniper didn't move unless it mattered. She learned that long ago. This was her 9th deployment. Her first with this particular joint task force, a mixture of Navy SEALs, Delta Force, and Air Force combat controllers. The best of the best, 43 elite operators, and only one woman among them. Sarah Reeves, U.S. Army, longest confirmed precision shot in her division. But records didn't mean much in a place where reputation was measured in scars and whispers. When she finally returned to base that evening, mission complete, target eliminated, extraction clean, she was met not with celebration but with glances. The kind that lasted a moment too long. The kind that said, "What's she even doing here?" The briefing room was cool, dim, and smelled faintly of burnt coffee and gun oil. Commander William Mitchell stood by the operations board, flipping through her after-action report. He was tall, older, composed, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to command a room. "Nice shooting today, Reeves," he said finally. His tone was calm, though there was a trace of surprise he didn't hide well. "Thank you, sir." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "Still not convinced HQ made the right call bringing you into this unit, but numbers don't lie." Sarah kept her voice steady. "I'll let my work speak for itself, sir." She turned and left the room before he could say more. Down the narrow hallway, the sound of laughter drifted from the rec area. A group of men playing cards, sharing jokes, the kind that filled the empty space between missions. As she walked past, the noise dimmed for a heartbeat. Then, as soon as she was beyond the doorway, it started again, louder this time, rough with that edge of mockery soldiers often use to hide discomfort. "Did you see that tattoo on her neck?" one of them said. "What is that? Map coordinates." "Trying way too hard to look like one of the boys," another replied. A laugh. "Probably the coordinates to the best nail salon in Baghdad." Sarah paused for a second in the corridor. Her hand brushed the back of her neck, fingertips tracing the raised ink hidden beneath her collar. The tattoo, the one they mocked. Let them laugh. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know what had happened at those coordinates. They didn't know who she'd lost there. She continued walking, her boots silent against the concrete. Later that night she sat alone on her bunk, staring at a small silver object resting on her palm, a pair of dog tags. The edges were worn smooth. Her brother's name was engraved there, the letters faded but still legible. She closed her fist around them and took a deep breath. The base generator hummed in the distance. Somewhere outside, laughter still echoed faintly through the walls. But inside, silence. That was where she lived now. Morning came too early. The operations tent was crowded, the air thick with the smell of sweat and coffee. Commander Mitchell stood before a large digital map projected onto the wall. His expression was hard. "Intel reports a high-probability hostage situation," he began. American aid workers captured 3 days ago. We believe they're being held here. He pointed to a cluster of buildings on the edge of the city. Extraction window is narrow. We move tonight. The chatter in the tent died instantly. Sarah's eyes scanned the map. Her stomach tightened. She knew that area, not vaguely, intimately. The compound marked in red was barely 2 kilometers from the coordinates tattooed on her neck. Her pulse slowed. She forced herself to breathe. Commander Mitchell continued, "Lieutenant Reeves, you'll provide overwatch from this ridge here. The assault team will approach from the south." Sarah hesitated. "Sir, I've operated in that sector before. There's a better position to the east, elevations higher, cleaner sightlines, full coverage of the compound and possible escape routes." Mitchell's head turned slightly, eyes narrowing. "We'll stick with the plan as outlined by Colonel Collins's reconnaissance team." "Yes, sir," she nodded, outwardly composed, but inside the tension was building. The intel didn't match what she remembered. Something about this felt off, too neat, too controlled. As the meeting ended, soldiers began checking weapons and adjusting gear. Master Sergeant Dawson, a broad-shouldered veteran with a grin that never reached his eyes, brushed past her deliberately. "Try not to break a nail out there, tattoo girl," he muttered. "Some of us have serious work to do." Sarah met his gaze evenly. "Don't worry, Sergeant," she said softly. "I'll be where you need me." He smirked, shaking his head. "Sure you will." But later, he'd remember that line. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the team moved out. The desert swallowed their silhouettes as they disappeared into the darkness, black uniforms blending into blacker shadows. Sarah climbed toward her designated overwatch point, each step deliberate. Her ghillie suit rustled softly in the dry wind. When she reached the ridge, she went prone, her rifle resting against the rock, her cheek pressed against the scope. "Phantom in position," she whispered into the radio. "I have eyes on the compound, no movement visible." "Copy that," came Commander Mitchell's voice. "Strike team moving in. Maintain radio discipline." Through the lens, the world condensed, bright moonlight glinting off distant metal, the faint flicker of movement that could be shadow or death. They moved perfectly, the 6-man team, sliding along the southern wall. Their precision was almost beautiful. And then something caught her eye. A reflection, brief, sharp, from a second-story window in a building to the northeast. Her breath hitched. That building wasn't on their map. "Wait," she whispered, voice tight. "Possible hostile in northeast corner building, second floor." "Negative," Mitchell's voice replied. "Intel lists that structure as abandoned. Proceed as planned." Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't fire. She just stared. That building, those walls, she'd seen them before. She remembered the smell of smoke, the screaming, the heat. 2 years ago, same place, same coordinates. The ambush that killed her brother. "Something's wrong," she murmured under her breath. The team reached the compound gate. The breech charge detonated, a burst of light and then chaos. Muzzle flashes erupted from the windows, dozens of them. "Taking fire, heavy resistance," Mitchell's voice roared through the radio. "We need that sniper support now." Sarah's hands moved automatically. She fired once, twice, again. Each shot clean, each target fell. But they kept coming, insurgents pouring from buildings that weren't supposed to exist. "They knew we were coming," Dawson's voice gasped through static. "It's an ambush." "Commander, fall back," Sarah called out. "East exit is clear, I can cover you." No reply, then a burst of static. The radio link was collapsing. The team's comms were fading. She took a deep breath. Her decision came like instinct, no hesitation. She abandoned her ridge. Sliding down the slope, rifle against her chest, she moved through the night like a phantom. 3 sentries went down silently. Then another. She reached the eastern wall just as an explosion tore through the compound. Smoke, fire, screams. Inside, the scene was chaos. 2 soldiers wounded, Dawson bleeding from his leg, Mitchell firing from cover, trying to coordinate what little was left of the plan. He froze when he saw her appear out of the smoke. "Reeves, what the hell are you doing off position?" "Getting you out alive," she replied, calm but fierce, pulling him down before another burst of gunfire ripped through the air. "There's an underground tunnel system," she said quickly. "It's not on your maps." Mitchell blinked. "How the hell do you?" "Because I've been here before." She reached up, pulled her hood back. The dim light caught the tattoo on her neck, the coordinates. "This is where my brother died," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "2 years ago, we were ambushed just like this, but we found the tunnels. Only 3 of us made it out." Mitchell stared at her, realization dawning. Those matched the coordinates Collins used for recon. "Collins had incomplete intel," she said firmly. "This was never a hostage site. It's a kill zone, but I can get your team out." Before he could reply, a grenade clattered near their feet. Without thinking, Sarah threw herself over Dawson. The blast threw dust and heat into the air. She felt shrapnel slice into her back. Her ears rang, but she didn't move. "Why would you?" Dawson stammered, blood streaking his face. "Because that's what soldiers do," she said simply. Commander Mitchell gritted his teeth. "Lead the way, Lieutenant." She nodded once, pain flashing through her body as she stood. "This way, stay low." They moved 5 survivors, 2 wounded, one guiding them through memory and ghosts. Behind them, the compound burned. Ahead, darkness waited, the tunnel entrance hidden beneath rubble and time. She glanced back one last time. The coordinates on her neck glowed faintly in the firelight, a mark she would never again hide. Because now they knew. And they would never mock it again. How do you lead men who never believed in you? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just lead and let time decide what that means. The tunnel swallowed them whole. A tight mouth of broken concrete, scorched by old explosions, half hidden behind collapsed stone. Sarah ducked first, weapon raised, night vision optics painting the world in shades of ghostly green. The others followed, Mitchell last, taking one last look at the burning skyline before stepping into the dark. The noise of the firefight faded behind them, replaced by the eerie hush of the underground. Every step echoed like a whisper of something ancient, forgotten. "Flashlights off," Sarah murmured. "Stay close, sound carries down here." The team obeyed, no questions this time. For the first time since the mission began, Sarah felt something shift. It wasn't authority, not exactly. It was trust, fragile but real, born from survival rather than rank. Dawson limped beside her, blood seeping through the field dressing around his leg. His breathing was rough, uneven. She heard it even through the muffled echoes. "You good, Sergeant?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Better than I should be, thanks to you." Sarah didn't respond. Gratitude wasn't what she needed right now. Focus was. Every step deeper into the tunnels felt like walking backward through time, back to that night 2 years ago when everything had gone wrong. Same smell, same sound, same dirt under her boots. Her brother, Michael Reeves, had died here. She remembered his laugh, soft and tired, the kind soldiers used when they wanted to hide fear. She remembered his hand gripping hers as the gunfire echoed closer. And his last words, "Get them out, Sarah, promise me." She'd kept that promise, barely, 3 survivors out of 12. And she'd never forgiven herself for not making it 4. The group reached a junction, a Y-shaped split vanishing into darkness. Sarah lifted her weapon, scanning. 200 meters ahead, she whispered. "Left passage. That leads toward the marketplace. There's a ventilation shaft halfway down, means we're close to the exit." Mitchell nodded, his voice low. "How much farther after that?" "About a kilometer to the extraction point." Dawson exhaled, leaning against the wall. "You sure you're not guessing, Lieutenant?" Sarah gave him a look. I've bled in these tunnels before, I don't guess here. He almost smiled, almost. Then he just nodded and tightened his grip on his rifle. They moved on, slowly, cautiously. The air grew heavier, stale with dust. The tunnel narrowed until their shoulders brushed the walls. Each sound became magnified, boots scuffing gravel, gear shifting, a faint metallic rattle from someone's canteen. Then voices. Faint, distant, but getting closer. Mitchell raised a fist, signal to stop. Everyone froze. Sarah crouched, switching off her night vision to listen. The voices echoed off the stone, distorted by distance. Arabic. Maybe 6, maybe 8 of them, searching. "They're following us," she whispered. Dawson's jaw tightened. "How the hell can they track us down here?" "They don't need to," Sarah said. "They know where the tunnels lead." She checked her rifle, counting her remaining rounds. 8, that was it. Mitchell looked at her, understanding in his eyes. "What's your plan?" She glanced down the left passage. The tunnel sloped upward there, tighter, with only one viable choke point, perfect for a stand. "Get them to the extraction point," she said. "I'll hold them off." Mitchell's eyes widened. "That's suicide." "It's tactical," she replied calmly. "They don't know this layout like I do. I can delay them long enough for you to reach the surface." He shook his head. "We're not leaving you." Sarah stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "You need to keep these men alive. You're their commander. I'm the one who knows this place. If you stay, we all die." Mitchell stared at her for a long moment. He saw the same steadiness that had carried her through 72 hours on that ridge. The same quiet defiance that had made every man in that unit question his own pride. Finally he nodded. "What do you need?" "Your map and your word," she said. "Get them home." He handed her the tactical map. "We'll send help. Just be there when I come out." She managed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "If I come out." Then she turned away before he could answer. As the others disappeared down the left passage, Sarah took position at the junction, a narrow curve with just enough cover to control both approaches. She set her rifle, adjusted her breathing, and waited. The first echo of boots came 5 minutes later, then whispers, metal scraping stone. Sarah closed her eyes for one heartbeat. She could almost hear her brother again. "Hold the line, Sarah, make it count." She opened her eyes, steady hands, slow breath. And then the first shadow appeared. She fired, one shot, clean. The man dropped before he could cry out. She moved immediately, rolling behind a different piece of cover. Echoes distorted direction, made it sound like there were multiple shooters. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. She used it, exploited it. Each shot was deliberate, a lesson in patience and precision. When her rifle ran empty, she switched to her sidearm. Short bursts of light cut through the dark. They tried to flank her. She shifted positions constantly, using every bend and echo to her advantage. It was like chess played in the dark, every move calculated, every mistake fatal. But for every man she dropped, 2 more seemed to come. A bullet grazed her shoulder, hot and sharp. She didn't cry out, just clenched her jaw and kept firing. Minutes stretched like hours. Adrenaline blurred pain into background noise. Finally, click, empty. She drew her combat knife. The tunnel fell silent again, only the sound of her breathing and theirs. Then a figure lunged from the shadows. She sidestepped, slammed her elbow into his throat, drove the knife up under his ribs. Another came. She twisted, blocked, struck. Movements born not of thought but of survival. The last insurgent fired wildly. The bullet caught her side, shallow but bleeding. She dropped low, swept his leg, and finished it. Then silence. The only sound left was her own heartbeat, slow, heavy. 17 minutes, that's how long she held the line. When it was over, she slumped against the wall, panting, blood mixing with dust. Somewhere ahead, distant, she heard the muffled rumble of rotor blades, extraction. She pushed herself up, gripping the wall for balance. Each step was agony, but she moved, one foot after another, through the darkness that had once claimed her brother. When she finally emerged into the faint pre-dawn light, the world felt unreal. The sky above was streaked with pale gold. The helicopter waited, its blades slicing the air. "Hold," Mitchell's voice boomed. He spotted her. "We've got one more." Sarah stumbled forward, collapsing into Dawson's outstretched arms. As they lifted off, the sun broke over the horizon, spilling light across the city's ruins. The fire from the compound still burned below, curling into the dawn. Sarah sat quietly, her head resting against the metal wall of the chopper. The men across from her stared, not at her wounds, not at the blood, but at her face, at the calm, the stillness. Mitchell looked at the mission log on his tablet. 17 confirmed kills, he said softly, single-handedly held off the pursuit. He shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. That's unprecedented. Sarah didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the fatting horizon, on the coordinates now vanishing beneath the morning light. The place where her brother had fallen, where she had returned, where she had finally kept her promise. 3 weeks later, at the forward operating base, the air was thick with ceremony and silence. Soldiers stood in formation beneath the desert sun. Commander Mitchell stood at the front, his voice carrying through the stillness. "Lieutenant Reeves has been recommended for the Navy Cross," he announced. "Her actions saved this unit from certain destruction and provided intelligence that led to the successful rescue of the hostages." The men who had once laughed fell quiet. Even Dawson, his legs still wrapped in bandages, stood at attention, his eyes fixed on her. When the ceremony ended, he approached her slowly. "We owe you our lives," he said simply. "I was wrong about you, we all were." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "Just make sure the next person doesn't have to prove it the hard way." Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she packed her duffel bag, methodical, precise, like every other part of her life. Mitchell appeared in the doorway, holding a file. "I've been authorized to offer you a permanent position with this unit," he said. "We need someone with your skill and your heart." Sarah paused, her hand brushing the tattoo at her neck. "Those coordinates aren't just where my brother died," she said softly. "They're where I learned what leadership costs." Mitchell nodded slowly. "So is that a yes?" She turned, meeting his eyes. "On one condition," she said. "Next time someone on your team has experience about a mission area, you listen, regardless of gender, rank, or tattoos." He smiled, a real one this time. "Deal." They shook hands, and for the first time she saw something new in his eyes. Respect. Months later, new recruits would hear whispers about her. The ghost of Fallujah, they called her, the sniper who vanished into the tunnels and came out carrying the souls of 17 men behind her. Sometimes they'd see her at the range, hood down, sunlight catching the tattoo on her neck. Not a symbol of pain anymore. A reminder that courage doesn't shout. It endures. That sometimes leadership isn't about orders or glory. It's about walking into the dark so others can find the light. And that dignity doesn't need to speak. It simply acts. How do you come home when part of you never left the battlefield? Some wounds don't bleed anymore, they just echo. The helicopter's blades had long stopped ringing in her ears, but Sarah Reeves still heard them every night. 3 weeks after Fallujah, she'd been reassigned to a forward training facility outside Al Assad Air Base, a place where dust clung to everything, and silence was the only thing louder than memory. Her new role sounded simple: train the next generation of long-range snipers, refine Overwatch protocols, advise on joint operations. But nothing about it felt simple. She stood on the firing range before dawn, hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the desert looked like an ocean of rust. Rows of targets stretched into the distance, silhouettes waiting for purpose. Behind her, a voice called out, hesitant, "Ma'am, you're the new instructor, right?" She turned. A young Marine, couldn't have been more than 21, stood stiffly at attention, rifle slung across his chest. His name tag read Henderson. "Lieutenant Reeves," she confirmed. "Drop the ma'am, we're not in a parade." He nodded, cheeks flushing. "Yes, ma, I mean Lieutenant." "Range hot in 5, she said. "Let's see what you've got." As the recruits lined up, Sarah moved behind them, quiet as shadow. She adjusted elbows, corrected breathing, and spoke little. The fewer words, the better the lesson stuck. But Henderson was different. Nervous hands, breathing too fast. When he pulled the trigger, the shot went wide. "Again," she said softly. He tried, missed again. "Why are you shaking?" He swallowed. "My brother, he was killed in Fallujah 2 years ago. I thought if I—" He stopped, embarrassed. Sarah's stomach tightened. "What was his name?" "Michael, Corporal Michael Henderson." She froze for half a breath. The world felt like it tilted. Her brother's name was Michael too. She looked at the boy again and saw not a soldier but a reflection of herself, years ago, trying to make sense of something senseless. "Then aim steady," she said quietly, "for both of them." He nodded, set his jaw, and took another shot. The bullet struck dead center. Sarah didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened. Days turned into weeks. Routine became her armor. Morning drills, ballistics reports, strategy debriefs, and at night silence, the kind of silence that pressed against her ribs. She'd sometimes walk to the edge of the compound and watch the sky fade to black, stars flickering like static, each one a memory, each one a life. The younger soldiers respected her, but none really knew her. They whispered stories instead. The ghost of Fallujah. The sniper who walked through fire and didn't burn. If only they knew how wrong that was. Because inside she was still burning. Every night she replayed the ambush, the screams, the chaos, the moment she'd thrown herself over Dawson. Sometimes she'd wake with her hand clutching her neck, the tattoo hot under her skin, as if the past was trying to crawl out. The base psychiatrist had offered to talk. She declined. Talking wasn't her language, survival was. But something began to change after the 3rd week. Commander Mitchell visited unexpectedly. He looked older, wearier. The lines around his eyes had deepened. "I see the stories about you have already made the rounds," he said, nodding toward a group of recruits sneaking glances at her from across the range. Sarah poured him coffee from a tin pot. "Stories make good soldiers feel invincible. I'd rather they stay human." He smiled faintly. "Still don't like the spotlight, huh?" "It burns." They stood in silence for a while, watching Henderson's class shoot at distant targets. The rhythmic crack of gunfire was strangely calming. Mitchell finally said, "You ever think about taking time off? You've earned it." She shook her head. "Downtime's when ghosts get loud." He studied her. "You think that tattoo of yours keeps you tied there, to what happened?" She looked down, brushing her fingers across the ink. "It's not a chain," she said. "It's a reminder that I walked out when others didn't, that I owe them to remember." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Just make sure you remember yourself too." She didn't answer. That night the wind picked up, a sandstorm rolling in from the west. The base sirens blared once, then cut. Power flickered. Sarah sat alone in the small barracks office, reviewing the week's reports. The air smelled like iron and dust. The walls rattled from the wind. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The sound of sand scraping against metal reminded her of shrapnel. Then a voice, not real memory. "Get them out, Sarah, promise me." Her brother's last words. She opened her eyes slowly, whispered to the empty room, "I did." The wind howled in response, as if the desert itself remembered. The next morning a new group of trainees arrived. Among them 3 female recruits, young, nervous, but with something familiar in their eyes. The same look she'd seen in mirrors during her first deployment, the look of someone already carrying too much. One of them, a compact woman with freckles and an Air Force patch, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Reeves, people say you're the reason that Fallujah team made it out." Sarah stared at her. "People say a lot of things." The woman hesitated. "I just wanted to say thanks for proving we belong here." Sarah's expression didn't change, but her throat tightened slightly. After the recruits left, Mitchell appeared again, hands in his pockets. "You're changing things here, Reeves, whether you like it or not." "I didn't come here to change things," she said quietly, "just to make sure they survive." "Maybe that's the same thing." He looked at her for a long moment before leaving. Sarah stood there, watching the dust settle around her boots. Maybe he was right. That evening she found herself at the range again. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the targets. Henderson was there, practicing long after hours. "Range closed," she said softly. He startled. "Sorry, Lieutenant, just trying to improve my groupings." She stepped beside him, adjusted his stance. "Breathe through the trigger pull. Don't fight the recoil, accept it." He nodded, fired again. "Perfect hit." He turned to her, uncertain. "Is it true what they say about the tunnels, that you stayed behind so they could escape?" She met his eyes. "It's true enough." "Weren't you scared?" She thought about it. Of dying, no. Of failing again, yes. He frowned. "Failing." Sarah looked out toward the fatting horizon. "You can lose people even when you win. That's the part they don't teach you." He fell silent. After a long pause, she said, "You'll make a good soldier, Henderson. Just remember shooting, the easy part. Living with what you've done, that's where it gets hard." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "I told you no, ma'am." Later that night, Sarah wrote her first field report since Fallujah. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. The measure of a soldier isn't in the shots they take, but in the silence afterward. It's in how they carry the names of the fallen, without letting the weight break them. She paused, then added one more line. "Sometimes leadership isn't about being obeyed, it's about being believed." She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into the same pouch where her brother's dog tags rested. Outside, the wind had calmed. The stars looked closer than usual, sharp and endless. She touched her tattoo again. The ink no longer felt heavy. Not a wound, a compass. And somewhere deep inside, a thought she hadn't dared feel in years began to stir, not peace exactly, but the faint outline of it. Maybe ghosts don't leave. Maybe they just grow quieter when you finally start listening. She exhaled slowly, setting her rifle beside her bunk. Tomorrow would bring new soldiers, new lessons, new scars. But tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to rest. Not because the war was over, but because she'd finally understood something her brother had tried to teach her long before he died. That bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep showing up, even when no one believes you can. And sometimes the most powerful battles are the ones fought in silence. Why do some people get called back to war even after they've given everything to it? Maybe because the battlefield isn't always done with them. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. The kind where the air feels too still, as if waiting for something to break. Sarah Reeves stood by the training range, watching the horizon blush faintly under the rising sun, coffee in hand, rifle at her side. For once, it almost felt normal. Then the helicopter came. She heard it before she saw it, a deep, rhythmic thrum that made her chest tighten instinctively. Dust spiraled across the range as the Black Hawk descended, blades slicing through the stillness. Commander Mitchell stepped out. His face was grim, jaw clenched tight, not the look of a casual visit. Reeves set down her coffee. "You're early." I wasn't coming, he said flatly, until last night. The tone made her pulse slow. What happened? He handed her a tablet. On the screen, drone footage, grainy infrared. A convoy ambushed in a mountain pass north of Kirkuk, 2 vehicles burning, 1 overturned. Hostage rescue, she asked. He shook his head. Worse. Recon team disappeared. Radio silence for 48 hours. We intercepted fragments of enemy communication, something about an American sniper captured alive. Her eyes narrowed. Captured. Intel's unclear, could be a bluff, but they knew call signs, mission tags, even names. He hesitated. They mentioned you. Her heart froze. Me. Mitchell nodded. They're baiting us. They know you're here. She stared at the footage again, the ghostly heat signatures, the broken vehicles, the silence between frames. So what's the plan? Mitchell took a breath. We've been greenlit for recovery and verification. Small unit, low visibility. You're on it. Sarah blinked once. You're sending me back out. He met her eyes. You're the only one who knows how to move quiet enough to survive a setup like this. She exhaled slowly. I train shooters now, Commander, not ghosts. Mitchell's voice softened. Sometimes those are the same thing. By sundown, the airfield was alive with motion. Supplies being loaded. Radios crackling. A familiar, heavy rhythm beneath the noise, preparation, focus, fear pretending to be confidence. Sarah walked toward the hangar where the mission team was gathering. Henderson was there, adjusting his scope. His face lit up when he saw her. You're coming with us? He asked, surprised. She nodded once. That a problem? Not unless you plan on missing, he said, half smiling. That earned him a faint smirk. Beside him stood Master Sergeant Dawson, older now, but still carrying the swagger of someone who'd once doubted her. Their eyes met. No words, just a nod. Respect finally carved into place by shared memory. Mitchell gave the briefing quickly. Objective: locate recon survivors, confirm status, extract. Hostile presence expected. Lieutenant Reeves has tactical authority in field. A murmur of acknowledgement passed through the room. Sarah adjusted the strap on her rifle, checked her suppressor, and pulled her hood over her head. Ready? Mitchell asked quietly. She looked at him. You tell me. He paused, then said softly, just come back this time. Night fell fast over the mountains. The helicopter cut its engines half a mile from the drop zone, leaving the team in near total silence. They moved on foot, the terrain sharp and unforgiving. Rocks shifted beneath their boots. The air was thin, cold, and electric with the kind of tension that only comes before something breaks. Sarah led from the front, every sense alive, every sound catalogued. The memory of Fallujah still flickered at the edge of her mind, the smoke, the screams, the fire. But she forced it down, focus forward. At the first ridge, she raised a fist stop signal. Through her scope, she saw movement near the ruins below. 3 heat signatures, 2 walking, 1 slumped. Henderson whispered, could be prisoners. Sarah didn't answer. She studied the pattern, the posture, the angles. Not prisoners, she said finally. Bait. Seconds later, the ground behind them erupted in light. Mortar fire. Contact, take cover, Dawson shouted. The team scattered behind rocks, returning fire toward muzzle flashes on the opposite slope. Bullets sparked off stone. Sarah's breathing slowed, not fear but calculation. She identified one gunner on the ridge. Fired. The shot cracked through the night. Target down. Shift right, she ordered. We're being herded downhill. Toward what? Henderson yelled. She didn't answer. She already knew. The same coordinates again. Different terrain. Same feeling, that cold weight of déjà vu. They fell back toward a ravine. Dust and smoke blurred vision. Henderson stumbled, coughing. Sarah grabbed his vest, pulling him behind cover. You good? She asked. Yeah, he gasped. Just déjà vu. She gave a grim half-smile. Welcome to my world. Then came the sound she dreaded, the echo of boots, closing in fast. Dawson leaned over, blood trickling from his temple. "They're flanking us." Sarah's eyes darted toward the cliffside. An old communications tower half buried in rubble, high ground, narrow access. Perfect overwatch. "Move," she ordered. "Up there, Henderson, Dawson, cover left, I'll handle the ridge." She sprinted through the smoke, rifle clutched tight, lungs burning from the thin air. Every muscle screamed, but her mind was clear. She reached the tower base, scrambled up the cracked concrete ladder, and positioned herself behind a collapsed girder. From there, she could see everything, muzzle flashes, movement, chaos sculpted in flickering firelight. She exhaled once, then became still. Her rifle barked once, a target fell, then another. Down below, Dawson's voice shouted over the radio, "We've got wounded. Henderson's hit." Her chest clenched. "Status." "Shoulder through and through, he'll live." "Hold position. I'll cover your retreat path." She fired again. Each shot felt like punctuation to a sentence she'd written too many times. Mitchell's voice came over the comms, faint through interference. "Reeves, extraction point compromised. Enemy closing from all sides. You need to." "Static." She slammed her fist against the comms. "Say again." "Nothing." She was cut off again. And suddenly, the cold realization hit. History was repeating itself. Fallujah, ambush, wrong intel, silence. Not this time. She switched channels, found the local frequency. "Dawson, new plan. There's a ridge to the north with old mining tunnels, 200 meters, you can hold there." "What about you?" "I'll give you 10 minutes. "Damn it, Reeves." "Go." She cut the channel before he could argue. The next 10 minutes stretched into eternity. She fired until her rifle was dry, then crawled to recover ammo from fallen enemies. Blood soaked her gloves. Dust clung to her sweat. The world had narrowed to one simple rhythm: aim, breathe, fire. When the last of them fell, the silence was deafening. Her body ached, her shoulder bleeding from a grazing hit, but she moved anyway, up the slope, toward the extraction point. By the time she reached the ridge, the sky had begun to pale, a soft gray creeping over the horizon. The team was there, battered but alive. Henderson sat on the ground, pale but grinning through the pain. "Thought you weren't coming," he said weakly. Sarah knelt beside him, checking the wound. "You'll have a scar to brag about. Congratulations." He laughed once, then winced. "Does that mean I get to call myself a ghost now?" She smiled faintly. "Not yet, you've got to earn that." Dawson approached, helmet under his arm. His expression was tired but respectful. "You saved us, again." She shook her head. "No, you saved yourselves. I just reminded you where to aim." Behind them, the helicopter appeared, small at first, then growing louder, brighter, cutting through the dawn mist. Mitchell leaned out the side door as it hovered. "Move, move." They loaded the wounded first. Sarah climbed in last, collapsing into a seat opposite Mitchell. For a while, no one spoke, just the sound of rotors and exhausted breathing. Then Mitchell said quietly, "Same woman who once said she was done with ghosts." She looked at him. "I didn't come for ghosts." He frowned. "Then what?" She glanced at Henderson, then at Dawson. "For the living." Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. As the helicopter banked west, sunlight cut across Sarah's face. The tattoo on her neck caught the light, dark ink against scarred skin. It no longer felt like a mark of death. It felt like a promise kept. Hours later, back at base, medical teams swarmed the landing zone. Henderson was rushed to the infirmary. Dawson followed. Sarah remained seated on the ramp, boots dangling off the side, watching the dust settle where the rotors had stirred it. Mitchell approached quietly, standing beside her. "Recon team?" she asked. He shook his head. "Gone before we got there. Looks like they were never meant to survive." She nodded slowly. Then the enemy didn't get what they wanted. What's that? She looked at him, eyes steady. Me broken. He studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "You're not unbreakable, Sarah. You just refuse to stay broken." She didn't respond, just stared at the horizon. The sun was climbing again, hot, relentless, unforgiving. And yet, for the first time, she didn't feel its weight. She stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "I'll be at the range." Mitchell blinked. "Already?" She half smiled. Someone got to teach the next kid not to miss. He nodded, watching her walk away. The faint glint of that tattoo caught the morning light, coordinates turned into legacy. Because in the end, maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was leading, in silence, in scars, in everything that no metal could ever measure. And sometimes, the strongest people are the ones still carrying the ghosts, but walking forward anyway. How do you teach someone to survive a war when you're still learning how to survive yourself? Maybe that's what makes the best teachers, the ones still bleeding quietly behind their words. Weeks passed since the rescue mission. Fallujah, Kirkuk, the name still haunted the back of her mind like ghosts whispering through cracked walls. But now the days felt slower, heavier. The base outside Al-Assad was calmer, too calm. Routine had returned, but peace had not. At dawn, Sarah Reeves stood on the firing line, wind tugging at her hood. Beyond the targets, the desert shimmered in soft gold. Behind her, the sound of boots, breath, and youth filled the air. "Range hot," she called out. "Engage on my mark." Her recruits lined up. She could read their nerves, the slight tremor in their grips, the quick glances at her every movement. The ghost of Fallujah had become something of a myth here. They'd whisper it when she walked by. She once held off 30 men alone. She saved a team that doubted her. She's not human. They were wrong. She was human, that was the point. Mark! Gunfire cracked across the range, a staggered rhythm of control and chaos. Sarah's eyes moved down the line. Henderson, now mostly healed, steady and focused. Beside him, a new trainee, Corporal Ava Ramirez, too eager, too fast. Her shot went wide, again. "Cease fire," Sarah ordered. Ramirez lowered her rifle, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Sorry, Lieutenant, I had the wind." "You didn't," Sarah interrupted gently. "You had adrenaline, that's different." The young woman's jaw tightened. "With respect, ma'am, I've hit harder shots before." "Then prove it," calmly. Ramirez nodded, resetting. The next shot landed clean. Sarah gave a faint nod. "Better." As the team reloaded, Henderson whispered to Ramirez, "Don't take it personally. She's like that with everyone." "I can handle a little pressure," Ramirez muttered. Sarah heard it but said nothing. Pride was natural. The army built it into you until it cracked under fire. Still, there was something familiar about Ramirez. The same hunger she'd once carried. The same need to be seen as more than the girl on the team. Later, during debrief, Sarah lingered behind. She watched Ramirez polish her rifle, precise, meticulous, but with the faint tremor of someone carrying something unspoken. "Where'd you serve before this?" Sarah asked. Ramirez looked up. "Kandahar, 11th Marine Regiment, lost 2 good people my first month." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's when you stopped missing, isn't it?" Ramirez hesitated. "How'd you?" "I've seen the look," Sarah said. "You stop missing because missing hurts more than killing." The young Marine looked away. "You ever stop seeing them, the ones you didn't save?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. "No, but you learn to live with them sitting quietly beside you." That made Ramirez fall silent. Over the next few weeks, the unit began preparing for a live simulation, urban recon with live fire authorization in a controlled environment. It was meant to simulate chaos without consequence. But chaos, as Sarah knew, never stayed contained. The exercise started under the pale glow of early morning. Smoke bombs, pop-up targets, and distant explosions turned the mock city into a convincing war zone. Sarah watched from the command post as her team moved through the streets, Henderson leading the forward group, Ramirez covering the southern alley. Everything went perfectly until it didn't. A pop-up target malfunctioned near a blind corner. Henderson, assuming it was friendly, signaled clear. Ramirez, seeing movement through smoke, fired. The shot cracked loud. Henderson dropped, his vest sparking from the impact. "Cease fire," Sarah's voice thundered through comms. Silence followed. Within seconds, Sarah was there sprinting through the alley, her boots echoing off metal and stone. She reached Henderson, who was clutching his shoulder, eyes wide. The training round had shattered against his plate but left a deep bruise and cracked ribs. Ramirez stood frozen, rifle shaking in her hands. I thought it was." Sarah cut her off, kneeling beside Henderson. "He's fine," she said evenly, though her pulse hammered in her ears. "You grazed the armor." Ramirez's lip trembled. "I didn't mean." Sarah rose slowly, her voice calm but hard. "Meaning doesn't change the bullet, Corporal." The words hit like shrapnel. Ramirez's face went pale. Later that night, Sarah found her sitting alone by the range fence, head bowed, rifle resting across her knees. The desert wind whispered between them. Ramirez spoke first. "I could have killed him." "You didn't," Sarah said quietly. "But I could have." Sarah nodded, "Yes." Ramirez swallowed hard. "You're not going to report me." "Already did," Sarah replied. "Standard procedure. But I told them it was equipment failure. You don't need punishment, you need understanding." The younger woman looked up, eyes rimmed red. "Why would you cover for me?" Sarah stared at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Because someone once did the same for me." Ramirez frowned. "You?" "Fallujah, my brother." Friendly fire in confusion. The truth got buried because it wouldn't have helped anyone live with it. She looked down at her hands. "We all make mistakes out there. Some cost more than others." Ramirez whispered, "Does it ever stop feeling like your fault?" "No," Sarah said softly, "but eventually it stops owning you." The younger woman wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't let this make you afraid to pull the trigger next time. Just make sure it reminds you to breathe first." Ramirez exhaled shakily. "Yes, ma'am." "Good, now get some rest." As Sarah turned to leave, Ramirez asked quietly, "Is that why you never take time off? You still blame yourself?" Sarah paused. The night stretched long and silent between them. "I don't blame myself," she said finally. "I just haven't forgiven myself yet." Days passed. The incident faded into routine reports, quiet corrections, nothing that reached command level. But Sarah noticed Ramirez training longer, harder. She wasn't trying to impress anymore, she was trying to understand. And somehow that made Sarah proud. One evening, Henderson limped into the observation tower, where Sarah sat reviewing mission footage. "Permission to speak freely?" he asked. "Always," she said. He smirked. "You scare the hell out of them, you know." "Good," she said dryly. "But you also save them, even when they mess up." Sarah leaned back, folding her arms. "That's my job." He nodded, studying her. "You ever think about why you stayed after everything? Fallujah, the tunnels, the ghosts." She looked at him. "Because someone has to remind them that fear isn't weakness. It's proof you're still human." Henderson smiled faintly. "That's not in any manual I've seen." "Then you're reading the wrong ones." He laughed quietly, then turned serious. "For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I'm glad it was you who trained us." Sarah's eyes softened. "You're still learning, Henderson." "Yeah," he said, "but this time I won't miss." He left, and for a long while she sat in silence. The base lights flickered below, tiny stars on a desert floor. She reached for her brother's dog tags in her pocket, running a thumb over the worn metal. For the first time in years, she whispered out loud, "You were right, Michael. It's not about surviving, it's about teaching others how." The wind carried the words away, but the ache in her chest felt lighter. A week later, a courier arrived from command, a sealed envelope, classified orders. Sarah broke the seal slowly. Inside, a single page. Joint Operations Request, Advisory Role, Redeployment Optional. Mitchell's signature was at the bottom. She stared at it for a long time. The words blurred for a moment. Optional. That was new. For the first time, she had a choice. She folded the paper neatly, tucked it beneath her dog tags, then looked up at the empty firing range. The targets swayed slightly in the breeze, ghosts of tomorrow's soldiers. She exhaled slowly. Maybe war wasn't done with her, but this time she could decide how to meet it. Later that night, as she locked up the range, Ramirez's voice called softly from behind her. "Lieutenant." Sarah turned. Ramirez stood there holding something small, a folded piece of paper. "I thought you should see this," she said, handing it over. It was a letter written in careful script. "For Lieutenant Reeves. You once told me ghosts grow quieter when you start listening. I think I'm starting to hear mine less. Thank you, A.R." Sarah read it twice, then folded it gently. "You did good work today," she said. Ramirez smiled faintly. "You too, ma'am." Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. "You'll never stop calling me that, will you?" "Not a chance." As Ramirez walked away, Sarah looked out over the desert one last time. The night sky above her shimmered, endless and cold, but not empty. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was standing alone under it. Because leadership, she realized, wasn't about commanding others to be fearless. It was about showing them you can still be afraid, and still move forward anyway. Sometimes strength isn't loud, it's quiet, patient, relentless. It's a woman with a rifle, a scar, and a promise she refuses to break. And as she walked back toward the barracks, the faint wind carried her brother's voice, softer now, almost like a goodbye. "You kept your promise, Sarah." She smiled. "Yeah, finally did." What do you do when the war you survived starts calling your name again? Maybe you answer, not because you want to, but because silence hurts worse. Sarah Reeves hadn't planned to accept the redeployment. She folded the orders neatly, tucked them away beneath her brother's dog tags, and tried to forget them. But forgetting was never her strong suit. 3 nights later, Commander Mitchell found her on the range again, because of course he did. Same hour, same wind, same silence between gunshots. He waited until she finished her last round before speaking. "Still shooting ghosts?" he asked quietly. She ejected the magazine, checking the chamber. "Keeps my aim steady." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Then you'll need that steadiness where we're going." Sarah looked at him sharply. "We." He nodded, sliding a folder across the bench. Joint Ops tasking just came through. NATO intelligence flagged chatter from a known insurgent cell. Coordinates match the same sector where your brother's recon team went missing 2 years ago. Her chest tightened. "You think they're still active there?" "Worse," Mitchell said. "Someone's using the old tunnel network again. Smuggling, disappearances, and one of our surveillance drones picked up an encrypted beacon, U.S. military frequency." Sarah frowned. "You're saying one of ours is still broadcasting from there?" Mitchell hesitated. "Not exactly one of ours. The beacon matches a transponder code assigned to your brother's last recon unit." The words hit like a bullet to the chest. She said nothing at first, just stared at the folder, her pulse pounding slow and heavy. "That code should have burned out years ago," she whispered. "Exactly," Mitchell said, "which means someone turned it back on." Sarah exhaled. "When do we leave?" The air smelled like dust and rain, that strange mix only deserts know. Sarah stood on the tarmac beneath a bruised twilight sky, her gear neatly packed beside her boots. She'd been here before. Different time, same feeling. The weight in her chest, the quiet before the storm. Dawson approached, adjusting his vest. Heard you volunteered. Sarah gave a small, dry smile. Volunteered is a generous term. He chuckled. You could have said no. Could have, she said simply. Didn't. He studied her for a long moment. This is about your brother, isn't it? She didn't answer, but the silence was answer enough. Mitchell joined them, handing out last-minute orders. The team was smaller this time, 5 total, compact, surgical. No room for mistakes. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate, locate the signal, retrieve data, exfil. But Sarah had learned long ago, the simpler the mission sounded, the more it cost. As the helicopter lifted off, the wind whipped against her face. Below, the desert spread wide and endless, like an ocean of sand swallowing history whole. Mitchell's voice crackled through comms. ETA 20 minutes. Terrain's rough, old tunnel entrances should be near the ridge line. Sarah nodded silently. The tattoo on her neck seemed to burn under the collar of her suit. The same coordinates, the same place. Some ghosts don't move on until you face them. They landed half a kilometer from the ridge. The night was moonless, quiet except for the whisper of wind scraping across stone. Sarah took point. Every shadow, every creak of gravel underfoot sent sparks of memory through her mind, flashes of the ambush, her brother's voice, the gunfire that never really stopped echoing. Eyes up, she whispered through the mic. Movement east. The team spread out, covering angles. Dawson scanned the ridge through night vision. No visual could be the wind. Sarah shook her head. No, wind doesn't breathe. And then a flash, brief, metallic. Before anyone could react, gunfire ripped through the silence. They dropped instantly, returning fire. Bullets cracked against rock, sending shards flying. Mitchell's voice stayed calm. Suppressive fire, Reeves' flank left. She moved low, rolling into cover behind a collapsed wall. Through the scope, she saw them, 3 hostiles, using old sandbags for cover. Professional, coordinated, not local militia. She took a breath, fired once. A head dropped, another shot, 2. Silence again. Dawson called out, clear. Sarah scanned the horizon. Her pulse slowed, but her instincts screamed. Something didn't fit. She moved forward, checking the fallen bodies. Their gear was modern, too modern. One had a patch she didn't recognize. Then she saw it, an American-made communications beacon strapped to the chest rig. Her blood ran cold. The same transponder code, her brother's unit. Mitchell, she said, voice tight, you need to see this. He jogged over, crouching beside her. That's impossible. Sarah stared at the blinking light. Unless someone wants us to think it's them. A click echoed behind them, too close, too deliberate. Drop your weapons. The voice came from the shadows, deep, controlled American accent. Sarah's heart pounded as 3 figures emerged from behind the rocks, rifles raised. Their uniforms were mismatched, no insignia, no flags, mercenaries. Mitchell's tone turned to steel. Who are you? The lead man stepped closer, face half hidden beneath a tactical mask. The people you left behind. Sarah froze. The voice, it was faint, distorted, but there was something hauntingly familiar. He removed the mask. For a moment, the world stopped breathing. The face staring back at her was older, harder, scarred by years she hadn't witnessed. But she knew it instantly. Michael. Her brother blinked. No smile, no warmth, just a quiet, hollow stare. You shouldn't have come back, Sarah. Her weapon trembled slightly in her hands. You're dead. Not quite, he said, voice like gravel. They told you I died in that tunnel, they lied. Mitchell stepped forward cautiously. Lieutenant Reeves, stand down. But Sarah barely heard him. Her heart was a storm of disbelief, anger, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope, dying in real time. "What happened to you?" she whispered. He looked past her toward the horizon. "We were captured, 3 of us. They made us disappear. When they finally cut us loose, home wasn't home anymore. Command buried us to clean up their mistake." Sarah's throat tightened. "Why didn't you come back?" Michael's eyes met hers, cold, tired. "Would you have believed me? The dead brother walking." He gestured toward the men behind him. "These are what's left of us, ghosts without graves. And now you're walking right back into the machine that killed us." Mitchell's tone hardened. "We can bring you in, Reeves, get you debriefed, cleared." Michael laughed, bitter and broken. "Cleared? You think there's a place for us now? We stopped being soldiers when your government decided we didn't exist." Sarah stepped forward, voice cracking. "You don't have to keep fighting." He looked at her for a long, painful second. "You think I'm fighting them?" Her stomach dropped. "What did you do?" Michael hesitated. "We made them pay. Every convoy that passed through our sector hit, stripped, erased. We took their silence and turned it into ours." Her heart shattered. "You're killing our own." "Not yours," he said softly. "Theirs, the ones who left us to rot." Behind him, the other mercenaries shifted nervously. One whispered, "Mike, we should go." "Quiet," he snapped. Sarah lowered her rifle. Her voice was low, trembling with rage and grief. "You're not the brother I buried." "No," he said. "The one you buried died under that city. This one survived. There's a difference." Mitchell's voice cut in. "We can end this here peacefully. Put the guns down." Michael shook his head. Peace was never part of the deal. Before anyone could react, a red laser swept across the rocks, a sniper's sight, locking onto Michael's chest. "Ambush!" Sarah shouted, diving forward. Gunfire exploded from the ridge. Chaos erupted. Sarah and Mitchell returned fire as Dawson dragged one of the wounded to cover. The mercenaries scattered, returning shots into the darkness. Sarah crawled forward, shouting into comms. "Friendly snipers, hold fire. We have non-hostile American personnel." Static, no response. Then silence again. When the dust settled, Michael was gone. All that remained was his beacon, still blinking faintly in the dirt. Sarah picked it up with trembling hands. The numbers burned across its display. The same coordinates, her tattoo. He'd turned it on for her. He wanted her to find him. He wanted her to see. Mitchell approached slowly. "You okay?" She didn't answer, just stared at the beacon until its light faded out. "I don't know who we were supposed to save anymore," she whispered. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the ones who need saving don't want to be saved." She closed her eyes, the desert wind howling softly through the broken silence. For years, she'd believed her tattoo marked loss. Now she knew it marked something far crueler, survival without peace. And as the sun began to rise, she realized something she'd never wanted to admit. Her brother hadn't died in Fallujah. But maybe the best parts of him had. Back at base, Sarah sat alone in the debrief tent, the beacon resting on the table before her. Its final pulse had stopped hours ago. She wrote one line in her report. "We found the ghosts, some were still breathing." Then she closed the file, sealing it with quiet hands. When Mitchell entered, she didn't look up. "He's alive," she said softly, "but not the man I knew." Mitchell nodded. "What are you going to do?" She stared at the tattoo on her neck, reflected faintly in the metal table. "I'm going to find him again," she said, "not as a soldier, as his sister." Mitchell's voice was barely a whisper. "And if he doesn't want to be found?" She met his gaze, eyes fierce but calm. "Then I'll remind him who he used to be, even if I have to carry both our ghosts." He didn't argue, just said, "You always did carry too much." She smiled faintly. "Somebody has to." As he left, she turned back to the beacon, silent now, but still glowing faintly in her mind. because she finally understood what that tattoo had always meant. It wasn't where her brother died. It was where both of them began to lose their way. And maybe, just maybe, where she'd find him again. What happens when the enemy wears your brother's face? Maybe that's the hardest kind of war, the one that asks you to choose between blood and what's right. The briefing room was quiet when Sarah stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, paper, and something heavier, like disappointment waiting to be spoken aloud. Commander Mitchell sat behind a stack of after-action reports, his eyes tired. He didn't look up right away. "They're calling it inconclusive," he said finally. "No proof of survivors, no proof of hostile contact. The official story ends there." Sarah didn't sit, "And the truth?" He sighed. "The truth doesn't fit well in reports." She glanced at the folder on the table, the one stamped classified, the same one that erased her brother twice. "I'm going to find him," she said quietly. Mitchell's gaze lifted. "That's not an order. It's not a request either." He leaned back, studying her face. "If you do this off-book, you go alone. You understand that?" Sarah nodded. "Alone is how I started." He hesitated, then slid a small drive across the table. Satellite feeds, unverified movements east of Mosul, convoys robbed, equipment stolen, rations distributed to civilians afterward. Whoever's doing it isn't after money. Sarah's hand tightened around the drive. "That's him." "Reeves," Mitchell's tone softened. "You can't save a man who doesn't want to come home." She met his eyes. "Maybe not, but I can remind him what home feels like." 2 weeks later, she was in northern Iraq under a false call sign. Nomad. No unit patches, no rank, just a rifle, a pack, and coordinates burned into memory. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. A rogue American cell striking outposts, leaving supplies behind for villages the war had forgotten. They weren't terrorists. They weren't saints. They were something in between, shadows feeding ghosts. Each rumor carried the same detail: a leader with a scar across his jaw and a U.S. accent. Michael. At night, Sarah camped in the ruins outside Mosul, the desert wind sighing through broken stone. She listened to intercepted chatter on a battered receiver, fragments of code she half recognized. One message kept repeating, faint beneath static. "Coordinates confirmed, deliveries complete, ghosts return home." She replayed it again and again until dawn, wondering if the voice hiding beneath the distortion was his. The trail led her into the mountains, where the roads thinned to dust and memory. She moved at night, sleeping in abandoned checkpoints, eating little, thinking too much. Every step brought her closer, and further from the person she used to be. By the 4th day, she found them. A small encampment tucked into a canyon, firelight flickering off camo netting. 5 men, maybe 6, American rifles, mixed gear, and there, silhouetted against the fire, her brother. Sarah crouched on the ridge above, heart hammering. She should have radioed command. She should have called Mitchell. Instead, she just watched. Michael looked older now. Gray streaked his hair, but his posture, relaxed, alert, the same way he'd stood on family camping trips when he swore he heard coyotes, hadn't changed. One of his men was speaking, voice low. "Supply drop tomorrow. Locals expect food. You sure we're not just doing their job for them?" Michael poked at the fire. "If it feeds a kid who'd otherwise starve, we're doing someone's job right." Sarah's throat tightened. He wasn't the monster she feared. He was still trying to save people, just in his own broken way. But then another man spoke. "And the patrol we hit last week, American, not insurgent." Michael's hand froze above the fire. "We warned them off the route. They didn't listen." "That's still blood on our hands," the man said quietly. Michael looked up, eyes hard. "You think Washington cares about the ones starving out here? We make the noise so the forgotten get noticed." Sarah's breath caught. He believed it. He truly believed this was redemption. She waited until the fire died down, then moved closer, silent as dust. When Michael turned toward the darkness, she whispered his name. He spun, rifle raised, then froze. Sarah. She stepped into the moonlight, hood pulled back, hands empty. It's me. For a moment neither spoke, just the wind moving through them like a third ghost. Finally he lowered the weapon. You shouldn't be here. I've been hearing that my whole life, she said. Doesn't seem to stop me. He almost smiled, almost. You came alone. Command doesn't know I'm here. That makes two of us, he muttered. They'd call me a traitor if they did. She studied him. Are they wrong? He looked away. I don't know anymore. They sat by the dying fire. The smell of smoke filled the quiet between them. For a moment, it felt like years peeled away, the siblings who used to argue over who'd get to hold their father's old hunting rifle. Michael spoke first. When we were trapped in those tunnels, I thought about you every day. I kept thinking you'd find me. I tried, she said softly, but they told me you were gone. He laughed bitterly, and you believed them. Her jaw tightened. Because I saw the bodies, because I watched the tunnel collapse, because I needed to believe someone was telling the truth. Silence. Finally, he said, truth doesn't survive long in war, Sarah. You should know that by now. She looked at him, really looked. The scars, the exhaustion, the flicker of the brother she'd loved buried beneath layers of pain. What's your plan? She asked quietly. Keep stealing supplies, keep fighting ghosts. He shrugged. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. Then let me make something else make sense, she said. Come back, tell your story, people will listen. He shook his head. They'll bury it again. Not if I stand beside you. Her voice broke on the words, but she meant them. She risked everything to get here, rank, reputation, her own sanity. Michael's eyes softened for the first time. You do that after everything. You're my brother. He looked down, hands trembling slightly. I don't deserve saving. No one does, she whispered. That's why it's called forgiveness. The sound came before the light, a drone hum, low and rising. Then a flare streaked across the sky. Michael jumped to his feet. They found us. Sarah grabbed her radio. Mitchell, this is static. Michael shouted orders to his men. Move to fallback positions, split up. Sarah turned to him. We can get out together. He shook his head. If they see you with me, you're finished. Go. I'm not leaving you again. He gave her a sad, tired smile. You already did once. That's enough for a lifetime. Then he pushed her toward the rocks as a missile hit the canyon edge. The blast threw her back, the world spinning in smoke and fire. Through the haze, she saw figures scattering, Michael's team vanishing into tunnels, the sky above burning orange. She crawled toward the wreckage, coughing, eyes stinging. Michael, she screamed, no answer. Only the faint echo of his beacon, pulsing somewhere in the dark. She stumbled toward it, half blind, until she found the transmitter half buried in ash. She lifted it, blood streaking her fingers. The coordinates flickered once, then died. Gone. Hours later, she was airlifted out by a NATO recon team. They found her alone, disoriented, half-conscious. No other survivors confirmed. At base camp, Mitchell stood by her bedside. His face said what the reports didn't. No sign of him, she rasped. He shook his head. The canyon collapsed after the strike. No bodies recovered. Sarah stared at the ceiling, her voice barely a whisper. They'll call it classified again, won't they? Mitchell nodded. They already have. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, tracing the lines of dust and smoke. He hesitated, then said, You found him, didn't you? She nodded faintly. I did. Then that's something. She turned her head, meeting his eyes. He wasn't lost, Commander. We were. He said nothing after that, just rested a hand on her shoulder before leaving. Weeks passed. The world kept spinning. Reports filed, names redacted, stories rewritten. The war machine never paused long enough for grief. But Sarah did. Every morning she walked to the edge of the base perimeter at sunrise, the desert stretching endless before her. She'd stand there, touch the tattoo at her neck and whisper his name. Some days she hated him, some days she forgave him, most days she missed him. Rumors started again, of a rogue cell resurfacing further north, striking convoys, but never killing the unarmed. Of food crates marked with an American flag left on villagers' doorsteps. Mitchell asked once, "You think it's him?" Sarah smiled faintly. "If it is, at least he's feeding people." He studied her. "And what will you do if it's really him?" She looked out toward the horizon. "Keep listening for the ghosts." That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah replayed the last thing she remembered hearing in the canyon. Her brother's voice, faint, broken, half lost beneath the roar. "Don't follow me, Sarah, not this time." She whispered into the dark, "I already did." Then, almost as if in answer, her receiver crackled softly to life. Static, then a single line of distorted code. "Ghost still standing." Her breath caught, the words repeated once then faded. She smiled through tears. He was alive, somewhere out there, still fighting, still trying to make the wrong things right. And suddenly the tattoo on her neck didn't feel like a scar anymore. It felt like a signal, a way home. She turned off the light, lying back with the faint hum of desert wind outside. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new names, new battles. But tonight, she allowed herself something she hadn't in years, sleep that didn't feel like surrender. Because maybe forgiveness isn't about letting go of the past. Maybe it's about learning to walk beside it, unarmed, unafraid. And as the night deepened, a single truth settled quietly in her chest, one her brother had taught her without meaning to. Sometimes redemption doesn't shout. It whispers through the ones who keep believing there's still something worth saving. What does a soldier do when there's nothing left to fight? Maybe she learns how to stop aiming and start forgiving. 6 months had passed since the canyon. Officially, Lieutenant Sarah Reeves was temporarily detached from field service pending reassignment. Unofficially, she disappeared again, this time into the quiet. She lived on the edge of a small UN relief outpost near Erbil, teaching villagers how to stabilize radios, patch wounds, and dig wells that wouldn't collapse with the first rain. No rank, no uniform, just Sarah. Some nights she'd sit on the roof of the prefab clinic, boots crossed, listening to the hum of generators and the faint laughter of children learning how to sleep without fear. It was the closest thing to peace she'd ever found. And still, she kept one ear tuned to the static of her battered receiver, just in case. Because ghosts didn't vanish, they waited for the right frequency. One morning, a supply truck rattled into camp. Commander Mitchell climbed out of the passenger side, dust coating his boots. He looked older, hair grayer, shoulders heavier, but his eyes carried the same steady warmth that had pulled her out of more than one fire. "You're hard to find," he said. That was the idea. He handed her a manila envelope. "Then I suppose I should ruin it. Satellite Recon picked up a convoy last week, relief supplies with NATO markings. Only problem, we never sent one." Sarah's stomach tightened. Coordinates. North, Turkish border, every crate stamped with a hand-painted emblem. He unfolded a photo, grainy but clear enough, an American flag drawn in charcoal. Her breath caught, Michael's mark. She looked up. "You knew I'd go." "I'm counting on it," Mitchell said, "but this time don't go alone." 2 days later, she was back in motion, riding in the rear of a convoy of 3 armored transports, dust plumes trailing behind them like smoke from a memory. Beside her sat Ramirez, no longer the trembling recruit, but a calm, confident soldier with a steadiness Sarah recognized as her own reflection. "You sure he wants to be found?" Ramirez asked. Sarah watched the horizon. Want isn't the point, need is. The younger woman nodded. If it were me, I'd want my sister to try. Sarah almost smiled. Then let's hope he still remembers what that feels like. They reached the border by dusk. The terrain twisted into dry gullies and jagged ridges. Their lead vehicle halted near an abandoned way station half buried in sand. Sarah stepped out, scanning the area. No movement, only wind and distance. Then faint, rhythmic clicks in her earpiece. A code she knew better than her own heartbeat. She keyed her mic. Ghost 1, this is Phantom, signal received. Static, then a voice, distorted but unmistakable. You shouldn't have brought company, sis. Her throat tightened. Then maybe step out and say that to my face. Silence then. You really never quit, do you? She turned slowly. Michael stood 50 meters away, half silhouetted by the fatting sun. His rifle hung loose at his side. He looked thinner, older, but alive. Ramirez whispered, "That's him." Sarah nodded, "Stay here." She walked forward, each step deliberate. No weapon raised, just the sound of wind between them. When she stopped a few paces away, she said, "You left your mark everywhere. Aid drops, medical kits. You saving the world again or running from it?" Michael gave a tired grin. "Little of both. You saw the reports. Governments forget these people. Someone had to remember." "You made your point," she said. "Now let someone else carry it." His smile faded. "They wouldn't let me, not after what we did." "You mean what you did?" she said quietly. He looked down. "Yeah, that too." For a long time, they stood in the space where words failed. Then she stepped closer. "You can come in," she said. "I can get you cleared. I can make them listen this time." He shook his head slowly. "Too late. There's a bounty on us from every side. The only clearance I'd get is a bullet." "Then let me take the risk." He met her eyes. "You'd throw away what you built again." "I didn't build anything without you," she said. Something broke in his expression. Grief, maybe, or the faintest flicker of peace. "You always did fight harder for me than I deserved." "You're my brother," she whispered. "That's the only title that ever mattered." A gunshot cracked from the ridge. Michael flinched as the round grazed his arm. Soldiers shouted from the convoy. "Contact," Ramirez yelled. "Unidentified hostiles." Sarah spun toward the sound. Figures emerging from the rocks, mercenaries, half feral, armed and desperate. "Your people?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "They're scavengers. They've been hunting us for weeks." "Then we end it together." He hesitated, side by side again, "Just like old times." They moved as one, covering, shifting, reading each other's rhythm the way only siblings could. Bullets tore dust from the ground, heat and adrenaline colliding into a blur. Ramirez flanked right, her rifle barking short, precise bursts. Sarah dropped one attacker, then another. Michael moved to her left, protecting her blind side. Then she heard the sharp intake of breath, the sound of something going wrong. Michael staggered back, a bloom of red spreading beneath his ribs. "Michael!" She caught him before he fell, dragging him behind a wall. Ramirez pressed a field dressing against the wound. "Through and through," Sarah said, voice steady but trembling. "Stay with me." Michael smiled weakly. "You always were bad at taking orders." "Shut up," she whispered. "You're not dying on me again." He coughed, blood on his lips. "Looks like I already did once." "Don't." He reached up, gripping her wrist. "Listen, I left files, proof, coordinates, everything they buried. It's all in the drives inside the convoy. Use them, tell the truth. Then come with me and tell it yourself." He shook his head faintly. "Some stories need endings." She leaned closer, forehead against his. "Don't you dare make me bury you twice." He smiled, small and genuine. "Then don't call it burying, call it letting go." His hand slipped from hers. For a moment everything went silent. No gunfire, No wind, just the weight of one heartbeat stopping in her arms. Later, after the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, Mitchell's voice came over the radio. Reeves status. She keyed the mic, voice steady. Objective secure, files recovered, 1 KIA. Identity. She looked at Michael's still face, the faint half-smile frozen there. Unconfirmed, she said. The next morning, the sun rose over the borderlands like nothing had happened. Ramirez stood beside her as the medevac lifted off, carrying the body wrapped in a flag that would never bear a name. You could have told them who he was, Ramirez said quietly. Sarah shook her head. Let him rest where they can't rewrite him again. Ramirez nodded, tears streaking dust from her face. What'll you do now? Sarah watched the helicopter disappear into the light. I'll deliver what he died for. Days later, in a secure NATO office in Erbil, Sarah placed a small drive on Mitchell's desk. This is everything, she said. Coordinates, files, transmissions, proof they left soldiers behind. Mitchell stared at it, then at her. You know what happens if this goes public. I'm not asking for permission. He nodded slowly. Then I'll make sure it reaches the right eyes. She turned to leave, but he called after her. Reeves. She stopped. You did what most couldn't, carried the truth when it didn't want to be carried. She gave a faint smile, truth's lighter than guilt. Then she walked out into the blinding sun, free in a way she hadn't been in years. That evening she sat on the same rooftop where it had all begun, the receiver beside her humming quietly. The sky burned orange, then purple. The desert wind was warm. She pulled her brother's dog tags from her pocket and held them up to the fading light. For both of us, she whispered. The radio crackled once, soft static, then a familiar line broken by distance. Ghost standing down. A tear slid down her cheek, caught by the wind before it could fall. She smiled, not out of joy but release. Maybe he'd found peace after all, and maybe, for the first time, so had she. The next morning, Sarah walked into the training yard. Recruits saluted. Ramirez waited by the firing line. Ready, Lieutenant. Sarah adjusted her cap, eyes steady. Always. She raised her rifle, aimed at a distant target shimmering in the heat, and exhaled. The shot rang out, clean, perfect. Ramirez grinned, still got it. Sarah lowered the rifle. Some things you don't lose, you just learn what they're really for. She turned toward the horizon, the same direction her brother had disappeared into, and whispered something no one else could hear. Then she walked away, the wind tugging gently at her hood, sunlight glinting off the coordinates etched into her skin. Not a scar. Not a memorial. A map leading forward, not back. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is finally come home.